In the 20th century, the majority of scholarship focused on how to prevent war and how war technology changed war. And in the 21st century, we are more concerned about terrorism. However, political violence is still the primary area of concern in international relations today, even though the subjects have branched out to include economics, human rights, and other areas of international law. The first point references a disaster film from the 1980s, which is mostly significant because Ronald Reagan mentions it in one of his famous speeches about nuclear war. It captures the nation's concerns over nuclear war and fear of war with the USSR. Today, this fear is more or less replaced by fears of terrorism, leading some to ask if major war has ended, especially total war between major powers. These larger scale wars, like we experienced during the two world wars, involved massive technological and industrial leaps that were only possible through the modernization period and the solidification of the state system. These wars left 100 million people dead, which is one reason why there are continual references to it in your education. We are interested in events like war because they shape historical trajectories in numerous ways. Modern warfare has seen fewer battlefield deaths, but conflict between states is ongoing and concerning for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that war strains domestic resources and the ability to govern. The idealist viewpoint on war, pacifism, the belief that nonviolent resolution of conflicts should dominate foreign policy, became very popular after World War I, which led to isolationist movements in the U.S. and Europe. Even government policy at the time seemed to reflect pacifist tendencies, but this did not curtail the rearmament of Germany and the beginning of a new war a couple of decades later. Major wars in the early 20th century created more battlefield deaths due to new forms of technology like tanks, machine guns, and mustard gas. We put nuclear weapons in their own category of weapon because they are so rarely used and also extremely controversial, although mustard gas itself is controversial and was outlawed by the Geneva Convention. In any case, the 20th century saw the creation of industrial-scale total war that involved redirecting important areas of the economy into production for war. On the domestic side, this created an industrial rent-seeking lobby for war technology, and some of the most lucrative government contracts are still secured for arms and other relevant manufacturers for the purposes of creating war machines. War in the bipolar era refers to the period following World War II, which had, prior to that point, been a multipolar system where power was distributed throughout several powerful European states. Multi-power power distribution in the world system was believed at that time to be the best way to prevent war between states by balancing power between multiple actors. Others have argued that the balance of power between two major powers instead of several provides the type of security needed to prevent war between states. Since neither side can be assured that they could defeat the other, war is basically held in a type of stalemate. The bipolar era is sometimes also known as a Cold War, where the USSR and the US were in a standoff that never involved full military conflict, but did involve many attempts to thwart and sabotage one another's global aspirations for power. The bipolarity of the world system was also aided by the demise of the Japanese imperialists with the dropping of the nuclear bomb on cities Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the subsequent death of over 200,000 people. Another factor reinforcing the bipolar nature of the system was the Warsaw Pact, a treaty between Eastern European countries and the USSR, which included control of East Germany. NATO was the alliance in the West that included the U.S. and the Allied countries, but was mostly influenced by Britain and France, and this had held control over West Germany. During this period, both sides of the Cold War stockpiled enough nuclear weapons to exceed 8,000 times the explosives used in World War II. While anxiety was high for many decades on each side, scholars and policymakers relied on one essential feature of human psychology: deterrence, or the avoidance of negative outcomes due to the assurance of mutually assured destruction. Both sides developed second strike capability, which meant that if one side attacked, the other side, which had military bases situated in various parts of the world, would launch weapons to destroy the other. Both sides were also deterred from dropping nuclear weapons due to the knowledge that a large enough explosion could result in a cloud that blocked the Earth from essential sunlight, a scenario that is known as nuclear winter. Avoiding this type of calamity kept major war from happening in the post-World War II era. However, the period did see significant numbers of military conflicts and what were known as proxy wars between the two powers. Greece, Nicaragua, Cuba, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran all saw major destructive wars in their territories as the USSR and US competed over control over governments in these regions in order to block the other side from spreading their preferred form of economic system. While there were military concerns, capitalism versus communism was a major driver of this conflict. The U.S. therefore sought to overturn any democratically elected government that cooperated or favored the communist form of government. The Cold War era also saw an increase in guerrilla warfare during these proxy wars, as various paramilitary and anti-government guerrillas relied on ambush and concealment tactics to combat military and police forces. Wars between smaller powers and between non-state organizations became even more common in the world system as longer-running conflicts between states continued to play out even after the demise of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. This period is referred to as a unipolar world, where the United States holds the role of hegemon or dominant force in the world system. Theories of hegemonic stability indicate that war is avoided when one powerful actor provides stability to the world system, but that when the power of the hegemon begins to fade, war is likely as another strong actor will move to take power. So this leads students of hegemony to pay close attention to possible challengers in the world system to determine where war or conflict might be imminent. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the late 80s and early 90s, there have been several developments in the world economy that have led us to look at potential challengers to the United States as hegemon. The following graph illustrates these indicators that we typically think of as important for a challenger to the hegemonic position in the world system. In terms of ranking by population, share of the world's GDP, and military spending, China looks as though it is a major contender for the hegemon, but there are caveats to this. For one, China would have to triple its military spending to reach that of the United States, and it has fewer nuclear weapons than Russia and the United States. So at this stage, its main leverage in the world system is the debt owed to it. However, many argue that this actually makes China more dependent on other countries in the world doing well. It does not do well for your debtors to not be able to pay you when you're on a gigantic development spree. So for now, fears about a military conflict with any of these large countries is misplaced, but they can and do meddle with politics in the United States with the aim of destabilizing democracy and gaining leverage over financial and economic decisions. Contemporary warfare involves less intense violence with fewer battlefield deaths. In 2013, for example, 6 countries reported 1,000 plus battlefield deaths, and the total deaths from Iraq and Afghanistan today are at less than 10,000. This includes 4,431 total deaths in Iraq and 2,353 deaths in Afghanistan. This is since 2003 and 2004. However, in the current era, we see interstate conflicts between middle-level powers begin to emerge between Israel and Iran, Pakistan and India, and a number of humanitarian crises with attempts by governments to ethnically cleanse their territories and commit genocide against certain peoples. In addition, there has been a growing concern over weapons of mass destruction like the ones used against civilians in Iraq in the 1990s and by the Syrian government as recently as 2011. In the 21st century, terrorism takes the place of nuclear fear as the main area of foreign policy and studies of foreign policy. New types of security threats are involved in terrorism, as well as more involvement of non-state actors, which forces some revision of existing IR theory that focuses on state military action. Terrorist attacks around the world since 9/11 have prompted quite a bit of international cooperation and made it not only a U.S. focus, but a global one. The erratic nature of terrorism has presented significant challenges to governments who must contend with non-state actors that do not engage in military action according to the rules of war and who target non-combatants in non-war contexts, leaving domestic governments uncertain as to how to protect against attacks. Since 2001, combating Islamic terrorism has been seen as a key feature of global policy, but it is worth pointing out that not all terrorists are Muslims, and certainly not all Muslims are terrorists. In fact, the FBI identifies right-wing white nationalist terrorism as one of the biggest threats facing the United States today, and we have historic terrorist activity related to these types of ideologies in our recent past. Terrorism is not a new phenomenon and dates back at least to the anarchist movements of the late 19th century. They sought to eliminate government by assassination of government officials or political leaders. Over time, the tactics of terroristic activity morphed to include other targets, including destroying infrastructure and interrupting important economic activity. These were common in anti-colonial movements, which have been labeled as terrorist by the colonial powers that were being challenged. It is important to point out that the term terrorist is used in a lot of situations that do not seem to align with the current approach in foreign policy. Hijackings, kidnappings, bombings, and political assassinations are common tactics used by more extreme terrorist activity that targets innocent civilians. Radical Islamism is a particular form of terrorism that has received the most attention in the U.S. and in global policy. However, in the U.S., 8 of the worst 10 attacks were not related to Islam, although Sunni extremists claim the deadliest attack on 9/11 2001. The radicalization of Islamic terrorists is connected to the extremist form of Islamism that seeks to purify Muslim societies. As such, the main targets of Islamic terrorists has been other Muslims, and a minority of their attacks have been against Westerners. The Islamist movement is believed to have been heavily influenced by the proxy wars and subsequent Western interventions in the region since. But significant dates include the Mujahideen response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. By 1983, Islamist terrorists had also spread to Lebanon, making international news. From that point, major attacks in 1993, 96, and 2000 began what is now coined as the Age of Terror in American politics. The era has been marked by, at first, conflicts with the Taliban and has since become embroiled in conflicts with ISIS. The fight against terrorism has also involved altering many civil liberties in the United States to facilitate capture and surveilling terrorists. The detention of suspected terrorists at black sites and prisons like Guantanamo Bay has received ongoing outrage and suspicion about the United States. Reports of torture of these prisoners has also further eroded the United States' reputation in the arena of human rights. The major objective of this chapter is to familiarize students with basic features and concerns of political violence in the context of international relations. While the forms of violence that states have used in combat have varied over the past century, the concern over how to secure and stabilize control and power remains of utmost importance to governments.